Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sisters in Scrubs. Today, we're at the clinic and we have patients at Eterna, which is our weight loss and longevity program. And we decided to film a podcast right before talking about if there was one thing that we can change in our patients from the get go, something that will help them lose fat. What would that be if I were to ask you, Vanessa?
I think that one thing that is very actionable and concrete would be not to cut calories, not to cut carbs, not to go on an extensive diet, but really focusing on increasing protein intake. A lot of our patients that come and see us, we also do food logs, reviews of the food logs. We ask our patients to track their food because in the beginning, if you're not used to knowing what a high protein diet looks like, it's important to weigh your food to understand if you're eating enough of it. So, what we have noticed, especially in the beginning of the program for certain patients, is that breakfast usually looks like coffee with a muffin, coffee with a banana, toast with fruit. So, we do have a good amount of the carbs, but we don't have the protein. That's what's lacking in most of our patients. And I think in the general population, when we're talking about weight loss, but not just weight loss, and also increasing muscle mass. So, as we know, muscle does decline with age, right?
So basically, the reason why do we talk about protein this much? Like let's just break
Yeah,
this.
because even with our patients, like we talk about protein a lot, but because it is truly very, very important.
And it's not a new trend, by the way. It's not, like a keto or intermittent fasting. High protein diet is not a new trend. It's been something that has been suggested for years and years. And there are a lot of studies proving that having a high protein diet helps with a lot of things, preserving muscle mass, stabilizing your sugar levels. Anybody that has a risk of being pre-diabetic, high cholesterol, it will stabilize those levels
Helps
as
insulin resistance as
insulin
well.
resistance, exactly. So the reason why we push on protein so much is because we know the benefits of it. There's a lot of studies that show the benefits of having a high protein diet. And the reason why people are having a hard time losing weight, especially fat, is because they don't have a high protein diet. And you won't realize this until you log your food. So to get back to the initial question, if there is one thing that we can tell our patients from the get go, having a high protein diet can be a bit like, I don't even know what this means. Like, what do I do? What does this mean
What
exactly?
is
What is
protein?
protein? So, if there's one thing that I can tell them is after our appointment, go buy a food scale at Walmart or Amazon,
Amazon.
buy a food scale and weigh everything that you're eating before starting to thinking about, oh, I need a 30 gram protein diet. See how much protein you're having
30
actually in
grams
each
per meal.
meal. Yeah, let's see how much you're actually having in a meal. Like the example that Vanessa gave, if you're having coffee and a toast with peanut butter or bagel and cream cheese, that's a very high carb diet. There's fatty in there as well, but there's no protein in there. And why do we push on having protein is because when you have a high carb diet, you're going to have a glucose spike. So your sugar is going to spike and then it's going to have a dip and you're going to feel hunger very soon afterwards. Whereas when you have protein in your diet, that is what is going to stabilize your sugar levels, is going to control your cravings, and is going to help you feel fuller longer so you don't overeat. That's when we start talking about calories and whatnot.
Another
Protein is
thing,
the main,
another thing
right?
also is having those sugar spikes very often can cause insulin resistance eventually. Insulin resistance also could be the basis of many chronic diseases, such as type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. So, a lot of it is also prevention to, again, to get you to a healthy weight, because we all know that obesity is a risk factor for many chronic conditions, and obesity itself is considered a chronic condition. So, in the beginning, we try to really educate our patients what a high protein diet looks like. So, we kind of tell them, let's start with the food logs. Let's start to see what you're currently at. Like, what is the baseline? How many calories you're eating, but what are the macronutrients you're having? How much carbs are you having? How much protein are you having? How much fat you're having? And we kind of work with them to tailor a plan that's going to really make sure that we're going to have over time a weight loss, but not just weight loss, fat loss, and an increase in muscle mass. So studies do show that a high protein diet will help to preserve muscle mass.
So it won't increase your muscle that much per se. But that is why it's important to have the exercise portion, which is the strength training. So that's where you increase your muscle, and a high protein diet will help preserve that. Whereas if you're training nonstop and you don't look at what you're eating, especially your protein intake, that is where you're not going to see the results that you're expecting or that you're waiting for. So that is another point that we see a lot in our patients that think that they have a healthy diet and it is not unhealthy. For example, we have patients that come and say, I have a healthy diet. Like I'm eating salad,
Whole foods, yeah, I'm
whole
eating salad.
foods. I'm buying things at Avril or Tao or, like stores where they have organic foods. Your diet is not unhealthy per se, but it is missing some key nutrients that will help you gain muscle and live healthier longer, right? That is the point of all of this.
So, another important thing to understand is that with age, there is a biological natural process where muscle does decline. So, I believe it's between 3 to 8% every decade, right? So, what protein does is that number one, if you're having a high protein diet, it will help stabilize your muscle mass. But if we want to optimize your body composition and your health over time, we want to also increase muscle mass. So to increase it, you need to pair it with a resistance training program. Now, in the beginning with our patients, we really try to maximize on the nutrition aspect because a lot of times that is the major key that needs to kind of like unclick. So once they kind of understand what is a protein, what is a carb, what is a fat, how am I going to eat at a deficit? So once they kind of get the gist of it, then we kind of also start to incorporate the strength training because we do know that both of these go hand in hand. So,
and just a question like that, where does the 30 gram of protein come from? Like, on social media, we see a lot of, you need at least 30 grams of protein. Like, where did this number come from? Why do people talk about 30? And does everybody need a 30-gram protein per meal diet?
So that's why at the clinic it's very important. We do the in-body composition scale. So we first of all assess your basal metabolic rate. According to your basal metabolic rate, your activity level throughout the week, we're able to kind of find a calorie deficit that works for your body type. And according to that calorie deficit, we're also able to establish how much protein, carbs, and fat you're supposed to have. General rule of thumb, you want to have at least 35% protein, 35% carbs, and 30% fat. Most of the time, when patients come and see us, we have maybe 50% carbs, maybe 20% protein, and maybe another like 30% or 20% of fat. The ratio is off. And what we kind of tell patients is that this is not a diet. It's not a keto diet. It's not a paleo diet. It's not a Mediterranean diet. So, what we kind of try to establish with patients is we're making lifestyle changes. So we're asking you to first and foremost food log and show us what you're currently having. We're going to work with what you like, because we understand that with nutrition, there's also a cultural aspect to it. There's personal preferences. There's a social aspect to it. So we want to work with what you're currently having, give you obviously tips and recommendations on how to optimize things and do healthy swaps. So we're not eliminating necessarily any food groups, but making healthy swaps so that your choices align with your health goals. So essentially, the 30 grams of protein, if you're having 3 meals a day, would bring you up to 90 grams of protein a day. Now,
Is that enough
for
the average person?
For an average person, could be a good start. However, most people need more than that. So this is why in our program, what we usually recommend patients is to have 3 meals a day and ideally also incorporate high protein snacks throughout the day. Now, again, some people, they don't like to have the snacks between the meals, which is fine. In that case, you would need to optimize your protein throughout your meals. But for someone who's just starting and doesn't know what a high protein diet is, because again, a lot of patients that come see us, when we kind of in the beginning, we assess the protein intake, and sometimes we're at 50, grams a day, which is very low. So we start off at 30 grams, but we kind of optimize it progressively. We meet you where you're at because we want to make sure that the goals we set for you are realistic. And also, we obviously do want to see results as well. But 30 to 35 grams for the average person is okay. But we cannot, just generally recommend this to everybody because it really depends on your metabolism and how active you are. Like someone who's an athlete, for example, training, 6 days a week, high intensity training, strength training, bodybuilding, 30 grams of protein per meal is not enough for this person. They're probably burning 3,000 calories a day and would need a substantial amount of protein in order to increase and preserve their muscle mass. So it really is individual based on the person itself. But if you're someone that doesn't know where to start, I think that 30 to 35 grams of protein per meal could be a good start.
And another thing that patients don't know is what is a 30-gram protein meal. For example, if you're having breakfast, if I have a patient that is logging their breakfast and that is having 2 toasts and peanut butter and probably jam, what is the change that I'm going to suggest to them? Let's say if I were to see this patient in our application, the first thing that I would probably suggest is lowering the amount of toast, just because I would think with 2 toasts, the total carb is higher than what we would recommend. And we know for a fact that it's lacking protein. So when we're talking about protein for breakfast, here are some examples. So it could be Greek yogurt, it could be cottage cheese, it could be eggs or egg whites. If you like having something salty, some people like having smoked salmon, tuna, things like that as well for breakfast. So those are your proteins. If you're not having these things for breakfast, then you're really far off from the 30 to 35 gram of protein.
A common, misconception that I also get from patients is some patients that come to us, they're like, oh, I skip breakfast. I can't eat breakfast. I intermittent fast. So I don't have a problem with intermittent fasting. I think that there should be at least a 12 to 14-hour window where your body is fasted. So your gut, has time to digest the food and replenish and regenerate. However, if you're doing like fasts on a daily basis that are going over the 14 hours, if we're doing 16, 18 hours every single day, I think it's an overkill because by doing so, you're having to skip a meal. And by skipping a meal, you're probably not achieving your protein targets. So what I usually tell patients is make sure you're having an earlier dinner the night before so that the next morning you're not having to skip your breakfast for the sake of intermittent fasting. I don't mind at what time you eat, whether you eat at 9 or you eat at 11, whenever you break your fast. But I do like to have 3 balanced meals a day because I do believe that with 2 meals, sometimes it could be very difficult to achieve your protein targets. Like some of our patients, we're aiming for a 130 grams of protein a day. So if we have to take that 2 meals a day, that's pretty high in terms of protein. So all this to say that I believe the biggest meals that should contain protein is your first meal of the day and your last meal of the day. If, let's say, your protein is a little bit lower at lunchtime, then we kind of have to optimize it by the end of the day.
Or with snacks.
Or with protein snacks. But ideally, in an ideal world, would be having 3 balanced meals a day. So it's not a light breakfast, a light lunch, and a big supper.
Yes, and another misconception that we get as well is like Vanessa said, people try to save their calories for supper time. We saw this case last week, eating a light breakfast or sometimes skipping breakfast, eating a light lunch because they don't have time at work, no snacks, and then having their, they get home, they're satisfied, they eat like their big supper.
Because their body is starving.
Their body's starving at this point. They haven't had any or no protein throughout the day, and they save it for the biggest meal for them, which is supper time. That your hormones work better during the day in the morning. So having studies show that sometimes if you have your biggest meal, in the morning or during daytime works with your hormones rather than having them later at night. So as much as possible, what we suggest is to having 3 balanced meals. So to get back to our initial question, Vanessa, if there is one thing that people that are listening to our podcast today can do as of today, what would it be?
I think that number one, you need to get a food scale. We need to know what We need to know how much you're eating. What is the baseline?
Where are we starting?
Exactly. If we don't know where we're starting at, eyesight can fool you. Like, okay, a handful of this, a pinch of this, a spoonful of that. It's not accurate, and we're not going to be really to assess how much you're having. And the goal is not to restrict. The goal is to see if you're having enough, to see if we need to add more. So number one is to get a food scale. Start to track your food, what you're currently having using a food tracking application. We have an application that we use with our patients to track their food and to comment on their food logs. Number two is to ensure you're having at least 30 to 35 grams of protein per meal. Now, like we said earlier, this is like general rule of thumb, but it doesn't necessarily apply to everybody in the sense that if you're someone that's going to be very active, then this might not be enough. But if you're someone that doesn't know what protein is and hasn't had a high protein diet, then this is where you start. You start with having at least 3 meals a day. You start with having at least 30 to 35 grams of protein per meal. If you're someone that also enjoys snacks, we usually suggest having high protein snacks in between meals, so 2 snacks a day as well. And honestly, like high protein, like she said, is, for your breakfast, you have the option of eggs, you have cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, smoothies. So you can, for some people who have a hard time also achieving their protein targets, we sometimes do suggest protein powder to help optimize protein. Most of the proteins, the foods that contain high protein, yes, do come from animal sources, but there are high protein foods that are vegetarian or vegan, because we do also have some vegan patients as well.
Yes.
So I think this is your place to start. You have to first look at what's going on with your nutrition, because even if you're doing all the exercise, all the PRs at the gym, if you're not fueling your body properly, you will not see results. So nutrition always comes first, and strength training is paired with the nutrition as well.
So thank you for tuning in. See you on the next episode.